Dear respected donors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to stand in front of you to talk about the historical significance of the objects and documents that are so generously donated to the museum and to the library of the Institute of Tibetan Studies. As was already explained by our president, Dr. Tagenya, one of the driving objectives of SOFIS since its foundation in the 1960s was to lobby, to persuade, to encourage families, individuals and even communities to hand over their heritage objects to the IAS museum and documents they inherited from their parents and forefathers to the IAS library, primarily for safekeeping for future generations, and secondly, to make them accessible to researchers.
I am, together with my husband Charles, representing Mr. Colin Heath, who was the owner of this beautiful silk cape that was presented to his father, William Leslie Heath, in 1921. First of all, I'd like to communicate a message. It's made of silk, and it has a beautiful red lining, and it is in beautiful condition. And what else can you say about it? It's got braiding down the sides, down the edges, and I don't know what this means, but perhaps a historian.
Just a
yeah. And I'm afraid I don't know anything about the traditions of wearing a cape like this, but I'm hoping that during the course of the afternoon we may discover a little bit more about the tradition of the cape. But this has been lying in the cupboard since 1977, or even before then, in the dark, and so it is in beautiful condition, and we're very pleased to have it back. And I'm very honoured myself to come to my first Sophie's meeting. I've been to the museum many times upstairs, but I've never been to a meeting because I've never been a member, but I'm now going to sign up to Sophie's and hope to come to many more lectures. And it's a great honour also to be representing Colin Heath in this very moving delivery of a cape that belonged to his father that originally came from this country. So first of all, I'd like to read a gracious message from Mr. Heath, who is now an elderly man living in Scotland, and he has given us the task to present the cape, and he sent a message which I will read out to you. I am so pleased that after all the intervening years, that's nearly 100 years, the cape should finally be returned to Ethiopia. I am sure my father would be very pleased. He was posted to British Somaliland in 1920 after being very badly wounded in the First World War. I know my father loved his time in Somaliland, and he was able to record his adventurous journey on horseback to Jijiga to meet Ras Imru, to me shortly before he died in 1972. Not many stories have such a happy ending. So that is Colin Heath's message, and I will deliver a message back to him to say that his cape is now in safe hands. Would you like me to?
No, it's lovely.
The other thing I wanted to do was to describe the provenance of this cape. There's often in artifacts that are returned to museums, often a serendipitous story behind them. So I'd like to tell you how it came about that this cape is now here. Many years ago, Colin Heap invited Mrs. Christian Curtis to help him make cheese in the north of Scotland. And while they were learning how to make cheese, they discovered that Christian Curl's father and Colin Heap's father had served in very similar parts of the world, what was then British Somaliland, undertaking very similar roles on the border between British Somaliland and Ethiopia. Colin Heap's father went out there, as Colin has just said, in the early 1920s, while he was still in his 20s. And he was given the task of accompanying the acting governor to meet with Ras Imru, who was then the Jasmach Imru, in Jijiga at the governor's palace. And while Colin Heap's father had served in the First World War, and he'd been badly wounded in his left leg, he wore his uniform, and to the Ethiopian delegation, that was a great honour that a British man should wear his military uniform. And so they feted him and gave lavish gifts on him and made him feel very welcome. In British tradition, Colin Heap's father, William Leslie, was not able to keep the gifts that he was given, except for one thing, and that was the cape. And he treasured that cape for the rest of his life. Christian Curl's father also served in British Somaliland some 15 years later, and he found himself part of a boundary commission, Anglo-Ethiopian boundary commission, deep into the Ogaden, and it was in 1934, and it was the time he was a witness. That delegation was a witness to the Well incident that foreshadowed the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, and he was one of the witnesses and was interviewed for an inquiry afterwards. He later led a group of patriots, or Argonach, in 1941 in southern Ethiopia, Sidama, I think, and very successfully. He then went on for 2 years to become advisor to Ras Biru in Jimma when he was governor of the southwest country under Emperor Haile Selassie's time. He then finished his career as the consul at the British Embassy for 10 years and then retired in the mid-1950s. His daughter Christian was brought up here, and she edited all his letters into 2 volumes which have been published, and the last one was published only 2 years ago, shortly before she died. I helped Christian with her second book, and I got an email from her headed Beloved Ethiopia. I got all my emails from her headed Beloved Ethiopia. She was always very fond of her time here. And she mentioned that her friend, Mr. Colin Heap, had a cape that he was downsizing his house, and he wanted to get rid of a few things and wondered whether Ethiopia would have any interest in it. So I consulted with Professor Shifra, who consulted with your committee, and we all agreed that the Institute of Ethiopian Studies would be a good place for the cape.
This is Miss Sarah, accompanied by Charles Sherlock. She is handing over these gifts to the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And now we have a certificate to hand over to her by the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. Thank you very much. የራስ አበበ አረጋይ ልጅ የመጨረሻ ልጃቸው ያው አሜሪካ ነበር የሚኖረው፣ ኢትዮጵያ መጥቶ እዚህም እንዲሁ እየኖረ ነው እና ልጃቸው ይሄው ከፊት ለፊት የተቀመጠው አቶ ወንድወሰን አበበ አረጋይ። እንግዲህ ራስ አበበ አረጋይን በትምህርትም በንባብም በታሪክም በነፃነትም አናቅም የሚል ሰው እዚህ ቤት አለ ብዬ ነው አይደለም። ስለዚህ እኛ እንደሚባለው በሌላ ጊዜ የምንራመደው በነፃነት የምንራመደው እነሱ ስለታገዱ እነሱ ስለሞቱ ይደገም። ይሄ እውነት ምንም ጥርጥር የለም። እነ ራስ አበበ አረጋይ ያስረከቡት ምናልባት የኛ አባቶች ተቀበሉ። የኛ አባቶች የተቀበሉት ደግሞ እኛ ጋር ደረሰ ማለት ነው። እንዲህ እየተቀባበልን እንሄዳለን። ለማስታወሻ እንዲሆን ሜዳሊያዎች አምጥቷል። ልዩ ልዩ ነገሮች አሉ። እሱ ያው በኋላ ፕሮፌሰር ሽፈራው ነገሩን ያቀርበዋል። ስለዚህ የራስ አበበ አረጋይ ሜዳሊያ የጦር አርበኝነታቸውን የሚያትት ዘና ማወል ይቀርባል ማለት ነው። አሁን አቶ ወንድወሰን ትቀርባለህ። አቶ ወንድወሰን አበበ አረጋይ አንድ ጊዜ ለካሜራ ሳይሆን እናንተ ስታዩ ያው ዲሬክተሩ ለዶክተር ታከለ ስጦታውን ይኸው ይኸው ሰርቲፊኬት ነው። እናመሰግናለን። እና አንድ ሁለት ሶስት ቃላት ብቻስ መናገሩ አይቀርምና ትንሽ እስቲ ምንም
እንኳን ለማድረግ አልተዘጋጀሁም ነበር ግን ንግግር ለማድረግ አልተዘጋጀሁም ነበር ግን ይሄ አጋጣሚ አጋጥሞኝ የአባቴን አንድ ኒሻን ለዚህ ለጥናት ምርምር መስጠት በመቻሌ ደስ ብሎኛል። የበለጠ ደግሞ ለእኔ ነኪ የሆነው ይህንን ነገር እንደዚህ አይነት ስነ ስርዓት ሳስረክብ አባቴ ከ62 ዓመት በፊት ህይወቱ የጠፋበት ህንፃ ውስጥ መሆኑ ለእኔ ትልቅ ትርጉም አለው እና በመስጠቴ በጣም ደስ ይለኛል።
በጣም አመሰግናለሁ። Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll start in English for our colleagues here. So this icon that you see here is a very, very beautiful icon. I wish I had a provenance story like Sarah. I almost feel like inventing a story to tell you about it. But actually, in terms of the provenance, we only know that it was given to my father for restitution, and he was very ill and unable to follow up. So my family decided that this was the appropriate place for the Institute of Ethiopian Studies, which is where my father had started his career, and so it's a fitting and appropriate place for this icon to come. Now, several specialists have had a look at it, and it's clearly of the Gondwarine period, and Professor Shifarao will say more. It needs further study. It's a very interesting icon in the Institute of Ethiopian Studies collection. There is one slightly similar icon that's from the 17th century, and it has St. George, and it has Abba Garima and a picture of Gabriel. So it's quite an unusual, special icon, and there is some writing at the top that needs to be studied by experts. ስለዚህ ይሄኛው ገበታ ስዕል አባቴ አንድ ለጋሽ ስሙን ያልታወቀ ለጋሽ አባቴ ሰጥቶት በታመመ ወቅት ይሄንን ገበታ ስዕል ቤተሰባችን ለኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም እንዲሰጥ ተገቢ መሆኑን አምነንበት እዚሁ አባቴ ረጅም ዓመታት ያገለገለ በመሆኑ ይህንን ለማበርከት ፈልገናል እና ይሄ ገበታ ስዕል ለየት ያለ ነው። የቅዱስ ጊዮርጊስ አለ፣ የአባ ገሪማ ስዕል አለ፣ የገብረ እንድርያስ አለ። ስለዚህ ለየት ያለ ነው። እዚህ በኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም ውስጥ አንድ ተመሳሳይ ገበታ ስዕል የ17ኛው ክፍለ ዘመን የሆነ ስላለ ምናልባት የዛን ጊዜ ሳይሆን አይቀርም የሚል ግምት አለን። ቢሆንም ብዙ ጥናትን የሚጠይቅ ነው እና ፕሮፌሰር ሽፈራውም ይበልጥ ሊያብራሩ ይችላሉ። አመሰግናለሁ።
ይታያል። እናመሰግናለን። ቃላቸው ያዛቸው ፎከስ ለማድረግ ጊዜ መስጠት ያስፈልጋል። እና አጭር ጨረስን። አይ ጨርሰዋል። ፓንክስ ቤተሰብ ማለት ነው። እነዚህ እንግዲህ የተቀበሉ ነገሮች ካሉ ቤታችሁ ስ በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ባላችሁ ቦታቱ ይበቃል።
ባላችሁ እኔ መልእክተኛ ነኝ። ፕሮፌሰር ጀምስ ማካን እንዳደርስ ነው ላከልኝ ሰጠኝ። ፕሮፌሰር ጀምስ ማካን ሶስታችሁ ታውቁት ይሆናል። በ1960ዎቹ ፒስኮር ሆኖ መጥቶ እዚህ 1-2 ዓመት ያስተማረ። ከዛ በኋላ የዶክትሬት ስራውን እዚሁ ላስታ ላይ ሰራ። ከዛ እየተመላለሰ በኢትዮጵያ ላይ ጥናት ያካሄደ በርከት ያሉ መጽሐፍ ጻፈ። ፒፕል ኦፍ ዘ ፍላወር፣ አሜዚንግ ግሬስ፣ ኢትዮጵያን ኩዚን የመሳሰሉ መጽሐፍቶችን የጻፈ እንዲሁም ሂስትሪ ዲፓርትመንት ብዙ መምህራን ያስተማረ የፒኤችዲ ሱፐርቫይዘር የሆነ ሰው ነው። ለስራ ጉዳይ ወደ ቦስተን ዩንቨርስቲ በሄድኩበት ጊዜ ይህንን ዳዊትና ሌሎችንም የያዘ ዳጎሳ ነገር ደጋግሜ ያየው ነበር። ስለሱ ብዙ ስናወራ አይ ልመለስ ይገባል ይሄ ወደ ኢትዮጵያ የሚል ውይይት ላይ ነበር። ብታደርሰው ውሳሌ ደርሳለሁ። ነገሩ አንደኛ ዳዊት ነው። 18ኛው አካባቢ እንደሚገመተው ወይ 17ኛው አካባቢ የተጻፈ ዳዊት ነው። ከዳዊት ሌላ የተለያዩ ጽሁፎች አሉ። መኃልየ ሰለሞን፣ አንድ ቅዳሴ ሴክሽንም ሌሎችም ነገሮችን የያዘ ነው። እንግዲህ ለኢትዮጵያ ስተዲስ አበርክተል የሚለውን ያለውን ከዚህ ሌላ ደግሞ ገጾቹን እያንዳንዱ እስካን በቦስተን ዩኒቨርሲቲ ላይብራሪ አማካኝነት እስካን ተደርጎ ይህንንም በፍላሽ ዲስክ ይዤ መጥቻለሁ። ይህን ነው እንግዲህ የማመለክተው። በፕሮፌሰር ጀምስ ማካን ስም አመሰግናለሁ።
ከመሄዱ በፊት ጀምስ ማካን እኛ እናውቀዋለን። የኛ ጀኔሬሽን ነው። ጀምስ ማካን እና እኔ ተደጋጋሚ ፊልድ ወርክ አድርገናል። ኢትዮጵያን የሚወድ ሰው ነው። ብዙ የታሪክ ምሁራን ያስተማረ ሰው ነው። በጣም አፍቃሪ ነው። ይህም ባርጎ ደስ ይሉናል። በጣም ደስ ብሎናል። ፍላሽም ሰጥቷል። አቶ ወንድወሰን ፍላሽ ያለ ይመስለኛል። እሱ ቢሰጥ ጥሩ ነው። እንዳይረሳ ለዲሬክተር ቢሰጥና በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ስለዚህ እንዲህ አይነት አሁን ፕሮፌሰር ይዘው በመምጣት ውስጥ እናመሰግናለን። ሌሎቻችሁ መልእክተኛ መሆን ትችላላችሁ። በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ለአቶ ወንድወሰንም ከላይብረሪ የተሰጣል። ጀምስ ማካን የላከው መጽሐፍ ሰርቲፊኬት ተሰጥቶታል። መጽሐፍቱ ላይብረሪ ገብቷል። ከላይብረሪ አይወጣም ብሎ የላይብረሪ ስራ አስኪያጅ ስለከለከለ፣ ስለዚህ እንደዚህ ጥብቅ ነው ማለት ነው። እንደገባው ቀን ሰርቲፊኬት ተሰጥቷል፣ ግን በዚህ ስነ ስርዓት መከበር ስላለበት። ስለዚህ አሁን አቶ ወንድወሰን ሜዳሊያ ስጠኝ ብትል መልሰህ ታገኛለህ። እሺ፣ በጣም ማህበሩ በጣም ደስ ብሎታል። በተለያየ ጊዜ ይሄ ስጦታ የዶኔሽኑን ሲመጡ ሰብስበን 5 ስጦታ ለኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም ሙዚየም እንሰጣለን።
ብዙ አልተዘጋጀበትም። ያው ምስጋና ነው። I am not to say more, but just to acknowledge and to say thank you. So I want to say a few words, just in the form of acknowledgement and appreciation. Thank you very much for bringing us this important item, you know. But we will leave for historians about the analysis of, you know, historical analysis of the items, but we leave for historians. So I would like to say thank you very much. ያው የኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም እንደዚያው የመጡት እቃዎች ቅርሶች በገንዘብ የሚገኙ አይደለም። በገንዘብ እንደዛ ብለን የማናገኛቸው እቃዎች ናቸው፣ ወይም የታሪክ ክፍሎች ናቸው። ሂደቱን የታሪካዊ ጥቅማቸውን ሂደታቸውን አሁን ያለንን ታሪክ እንዴት ያጠናክሩልናል የሚለው ለታሪክ ባለሙያዎች ነው የሚተው። እንደ ኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም ግን ይሄ ተቋም እንደምታውቁት ሙዚየም እና ላይብረሪ ያለው፣ ላይብረሪ የበለጸገው በተለይ የአርካይቭ ሴክሽኑ ማኑስክሪፕት ሴክሽኑ በሰዎች ስጦታ ነው። ምክንያቱም አሁን ዝም ብለን ጽፈን የምናመጣው ነገር ስላልሆነ ሰዎች፣ ግለሰቦች በታሪክ ሂደት ውስጥ ትልቅ ቦታ የነበራቸው ኢትዮጵያውያን ያስቀመጡልንን እያመጡ ይሰጡናል። በተለያየ ጊዜ ወይ ሲገባቸው ወይ ሲያገኙት ወይም ደግሞ በተለያዩ ምክንያቶች እያመጡ ለኢትዮጵያ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም ይሰጣሉ። ለዚህ በጣም ከፍተኛ አክብሮትና ምስጋና አለ። ይሄ ተቋም በተለይ ላይብረሪው እየዳበረ ከጊዜ ወደ ጊዜ የማይጠቅም የሚመስል ነገር ለጥናትና ምርምር ሰዎች ሲመጡ ከዚህ ሲያገኙ በጣም ነው የሚገርማቸው። በጣም ጥብቅ ነው። አሁን አዳዲስ ህጎችን እያወጣን እየሄድን ነው። እንዴት ይጠቀማል ሰው፣ እንዴት ኮፒ ያደርጋል የተወሰነውን፣ እንዴት ለምርምርና ለጥናትና ለምርምር ይጠቀምባታል የሚለውን የሚያሳይ የህግ ማዕቀፍ እያወጣን ነው። ሀገሪቷ የህግ ማዕቀፍ የላትም። አርካይቭ ማኑስክሪፕት እንዴት ይጠቀማል አንድ ሰው ከውጭ ሀገር ሲመጣ ከሀገር ውስጥ ሲመጣ የሚለው ነገር ግን በራሳችን ተነሳሽነት በጣም እርግጠኛ ነኝ በቅርብ ጊዜ ውስጥ እሱ ነው ያለው እናስገባለን። ሰዎች ሲያመጡ እንደ ቀላል ነገር መቅጠር የለብንም፣ ዋጋ ልንሰጠው ስለሚገባ ማለት ነው። በጣም ልናመሰግናችሁ እንፈልጋለን። ሚውዚየምን በተመለከተ ተመሳሳይ ነገር ነው። በግዢ የማናገኛቸው ታሪካዊ ቅርሶች ወደ ተቋማችን በጣም ደስ ስለሚላቸው የሚሰጡ እውነት ለመናገር በጣም ብዙ ቦታ የማታገኟቸው እዚህ ጥናትና ምርምር ተቋም ውስጥ ይገኛሉ። ይሄ አንደኛ የተቋሙ ከዕለት በየጊዜው ራሱን አፕዴት እያደረገ ታሪካዊ ጥቅም ያላቸውን ነገሮች ወደ እይታ ስለሚያቀርብ ሰዎች ያንን ሲያዩ በጣም ይደነቁና ይሄም ይጠቅማል እንዴ? ግን በጣም ይጠቅማል። ታሪካችንን እያደስን እየጨመርን ባለን ነገር ላይ የመረጃ እጥረት ሲኖር ያንን መረጃ እያሟሉልን ስለሚሄዱ በጣም ይጠቅመናል። ይህንን ስለሰጣችሁን በጣም ከፍተኛ ምስጋና በተቋሙ ስም በራሴም ስም ለማቅረብ እፈልጋለሁ።
But these gifts came through individual interventions, individual lobbying, etc. So I should please allow me to be a little selective and express my appreciation, very, very profound, heartfelt, very personal appreciation to two individuals in all this. This is to Dr. Tagay, and to Dr. Alula for making this possible. Finally, of course, the donors come into the picture. Ato Wondosen, we are really grateful to you, very, very grateful. The Sherlocks, we are really grateful to both of you for your commitment, and Shagao, and through you, Getachew, we are really grateful. This is great. It's not for just today, even for future. And we hope, as Dr. Tagay again and again said, we hope that other families would also see this and bring over whatever they have to us to keep them for safekeeping, to keep them for future generations. That's number one. Number two, to study them, to enable young people to study them, to build up knowledge about the country by using these things. So don't think things are bad, easy, not needed, not used. If you have something from your grandfather, call someone from the institute and ask him whether it's valuable. That someone will tell you, oh, it's valuable, bring it over. So, we tend to throw away things because, yes, grandmother used to have this. It's not any more important. Now the fashion is gone, so you throw it away. This is not advisable. Anything from your grandfather, your grandmother, your great-grandfather, anything. First check with people here in the institute. They will tell you whether or not to throw them away. And my bet is 99% of the cases they will say, this is valuable, bring it over. So please keep this in mind. Tell people to pass on whatever you have inherited to your to the IS. Thank you very much for your patience.